Okay, so welcome everyone. So today is the first lecture in a series of 5 lectures on AI for good. We are going to talk about different topics related to AI for good. If you go to the, so there'll be a lecture today, next week, and then the following 4 weeks, okay, till the end of August. And in September, we will resume our guest lectures, our guest presentations. Next slide, please, Prafula. Thank you. Yeah, so the theme, so today is about poverty reduction or poverty. It's more focused on developing countries, right? It's not, it's applicable also to all countries, but the focus more here is on developing countries. Next slide will be on hunger. Right. The next lecture will be on hunger. The third lecture will be about cities and communities. Fourth lecture will be on energy. And the fifth lecture will be on nature, land, seas, and on ocean. I skipped healthcare because we had a previous presentation on this topic on climate change. We already had a presentation on this. Next slide, please. So this is based on the forthcoming book. Maybe can you put it in slideshow mode, Prafula, so maybe we can see the screen, bigger screen. At the bottom, yeah, I think, yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So this is the part of a forthcoming book to be published in October. So it's the book covers more themes, right? From poverty reduction to infrastructure, peace and justice, and so on. Right? So it will give you a glimpse of what is in this book. Next slide, please. So the outline today, I'll talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. So some of you might have heard of it. If not, I'll discuss them briefly. Then I'll talk about the state of world poverty, the causes of poverty, the SDG targets, how to alleviate poverty, how AI can help to alleviate poverty, some case studies, and then I will conclude. It'll be like an overview, right? We only have 1 hour, so we won't be able to dig into all the details, but it'll give you a good overview and some ideas, maybe for research or for personal projects that you might have. Next slide, please. So the Sustainable Development Goals, you might have heard of them if you're interested in the development issues. They are part of a United Nations 2030 agenda, right? So these are like a series of 17 goals, but that you have them on the slide. They were defined in 2015, right? And they were followed by specific targets in 2017. So these goals are, I would call them aspirational, meaning that there's no, if we don't reach these goals, nobody is going to jail or anything, right? So it's what the world wants to achieve. Some of these goals are supported by international treaties or agreements, like the Paris Accord on climate change, but in reality, if we don't, if we miss the targets, I mean, the countries are sovereign, so nothing is going to happen to them. But it's like as the world community, these kind of things that the goals that we want to achieve, and you see that the goals are very could be very different from so number 1 is the theme of today. It's like no poverty. Goal number 2, zero hunger. So it'll be the theme of next week. Then third is like health, then education, gender equality, water, sanitation, etc. And it goes to goal 16, peace and justice and strong institutions. And 17 will be partnerships for the goals, how we set up ourselves to achieve these goals. So you can learn more, like as I put a web link there, and you can learn more about these goals. And the book basically goes over all these individual goals and see how AI can help achieve them. Next slide, please. So The problems, so they were defined to the 2015. Where we are now at 2022. We are 7 years into these goals, and the outlook is not great, right? And part of the, so if I read that, so this is a quote from one of the UN official. So using the latest available data and estimates, it reveals that the 2030 agenda for sustainable development is in grave jeopardy due to multiple cascading and intersecting crises. COVID-19, climate change, and conflict predominate. Each of them and their complex interactions impact all of the goals, creating spin-off crises in food and nutrition, health, education, the environment, and peace and security. To put the world on track to sustainability will require concerted action on a global scale. Right? So there's a report that is published every year. So this one was published, I think, on July 7th, like very recently, and the outlook is not great. Of course, because of the COVID pandemic, some of these goals have been put aside. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the theme of today, the poverty, right? The world poverty. There's a small typo here. So as measured by the, so there are different ways to measure poverty, right? And none of them is really like the truth. Usually, the poverty, at least at the global level for developing countries, is when you have when you have available to you less than $2 per day to live, right? As income or financial resources, which is very low, right? You wouldn't be able to live in the US like that. But this is a kind of a way to define it, a uniform way. It's not perfect. In the US, for instance, poverty level is much higher than that. Right? The good news is that the poverty has been trending down, right, since the 1990s, and this is a graph that shows the population living in poverty, defined in millions, right? So in 1990, close to 1.9 billion people were living under the poverty line, which is like very low, right? Like only $2 per day. Now the population is close to 700 million, right, in 2017, and it has increased because of COVID. And a big chunk of this progress was achieved thanks to the progress in Asia, especially China and India. Next slide, please. So today, the poor, I mean, there are poor everywhere, right? Even in North America and in rich countries have poor, but the very, very poor, who is like no less than $2 to live per day, are concentrated. You see this in this map. What's a darker color are like the poorest population. They are concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa, right, and in South Asia, and countries like Afghanistan also have been going through a lot of like poverty, and poverty affects disproportionately children, women, less educated, and the rural populations. Okay. So next slide, please. Poverty is a different. So here I just use the poverty line. It's like something that economists use, like less than $2 per day. But poverty is more complex than that. So some economists on the famous economist Amartya Sen at Harvard has defined poverty not only based on GDP and income, but try to include other measures such as nutrition or so at the country level, you can nutrition, child mortality, years of schooling, school attendance, if you have like cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, and so on, right? So housing. The idea is that you live, you don't have a house, you're homeless, or you don't have electricity, you don't have drinking water. It indicates a very it is a good proxy for poverty too. So do you have an annual report that is published on this? Even though today is the theme of poverty, the other weeks when we talk about health, when we talk about hunger, infrastructure, and so on, all these other goals are also related to poverty. Next slide, please. So let me go over some causes of poverty, right? And there's I mean, this is a very complex topic, so I just give you some ideas. So first is obviously is employment, right? So people who are like jobless, if you cannot generate income, you're more likely to be poor. It is well, you have to afford, you know, you have to afford the food, housing, energy, and so on, to to take care of yourself and your family. It is also a big problem for women, right? Especially in developing countries, because they take a larger share of household work, right, and childcare. So they have to cook at home. They have to, but cooking at home is not only the act of cooking; it's also, gathering the woods, to put in your stove, so to collect the woods, go to the market, buy the food, and take care of the children and childcare. So many women, in fact, don't have employment, right? So they are already almost by in some society, they don't have access to employment, so they are already like very poor. So because they cannot earn income by themselves. Okay, so one reason is employment. Next slide, please. Economic growth. Well, so economic growth, usually there's a correlation between lower poverty and higher economic growth. If an economy shrinks, right, so no wealth is created, right? There's no income generation, right? So if there's a suppose like tomorrow, like suddenly nobody was earning a paycheck, or there's then the economy will collapse. And we have seen this like in the Eastern Bloc, right, during the time the USSR, right, before Russia. Their economies were very weak, right, because they went through like some economic reforms which are like very poorly thought of, and they didn't have economic growth, and a lot of poverty. And we see it also today, like countries with the lowest economic growth tend to be the poorest, right? And economic growth is not. I mean, it has also issues, right? It can increase inequality, right? And later on in the future lectures, we'll talk about sustainability, right? So before we didn't care too much about the environment and so on, but today, if I chop a tree, and I resell it, I'm creating income, right? I'm creating economic growth. But I'm endangering nature and sustainability of our economy. Yeah. Next slide, please. Poverty traps. So poverty traps is an interesting, very important notions. They're not everywhere, but they can be seen sometimes. It means that you are in a situation where you cannot escape poverty, right? So here I give you a few examples. So here the idea is that you have very little assets or income, right? You have no asset, no income. It's very difficult to escape poverty. So, for instance, for a farmer needs a bit of resources to buy seeds, so he can plant, so she can plant them, and then have a harvest and have things to sell in the market, right? So no seed, no crops, so no income, no money, right? If you do livestock, you have to buy chicks, right? You have to be able to feed the chicks, to raise chickens, sell eggs, and so on. So you need this. You need that initial resources. So you start with zero, nobody is helping you. No loans, nothing. It's very difficult to escape. In terms of education too, right? If you cannot afford to send your children to school, to the local school, because school is too far. No transportation, or schools are expensive, right? Children cannot get an education, right? They don't get it. If they stop only with the primary level of education, they remain uneducated, and your next generation is very likely to do better than yourself. So these are the kind of poverty traps that sometimes justify help, government aids, actions, or NGOs. Not everything is a poverty trap, right? But sometimes you can see it, and it's quite intuitive, right? Another one that I didn't mention is health, right? You need a minimum health status. You have to be healthy so that you can perform your job. If you are sick, you cannot. You're likely to remain poor. Next slide, please. Public policies. So they can public policies can help, right? They can. So we expect public investment, public policy to provide. In some countries, they provide like healthcare, education, at least primary education, infrastructure. You need water and energy, electricity, communication. You need phones. You need internet. Transportation, and sometimes some financial services. You need a loan, right, to the population. I'll go over one example later on. But for instance, during COVID, in some countries where the governments wanted to help, to give a cash transfer to their constituents, they were using like mobile money and mobile phones, right, to transfer cash to people. So it means that you need a cell phone system, right? You need people to be able to afford a cell phone, right, and to have to read instruction and to be able to use mobile money, right? Public policies can also make things worse, right? So here I just give. I mean, you have corrupt governments, or like governments that don't really look after their people, can make things much worse. In countries with a high inflation, so I mean inflation like we have here today, but the hyperinflation, inflation of 100% per month or per week, then people are very poor. People have fixed salary, and they cannot afford to buy food, right? The wages don't adjust fast enough. So governance is also a big issue, and very often in Africa we see also military conflict, armed conflicts. Could be like civil wars or wars in neighboring countries. It's also, could say, could be a public policy failure. It's also very detrimental for the welfare of the people in the country. Can increase poverty a lot. Next slide. So other factors. So in this book that I highly recommend, that by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, now at Columbia, but he talks about the end of poverty. He mentions other factors: government corruption, legal and social disparities based on gender, ethnicity, or caste. Right. So some castes are better privileges than others, or by religion, ethnicity. Right. Disease also can affect poverty. Lack of infrastructure, we talk about that. Unstable political landscapes, right? You have political coup all the times, protectionism, geographic barriers. And COVID, right? So COVID-19 has reversed the trend of poverty improvements, right? So push maybe like 100 million people back to poverty, with a great effect in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. So in 2015, the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, have been defined, and in 2017, the General Assembly of the United Nations have added these specific targets. So each goal is followed by targets, right, to make maybe these goals more achievable. So here I've listed the targets linked to the poverty reduction, right? So some of them are like it's not wishful thinking, but they're just like some sub goals that they have. Sometimes these are like things that you need to achieve to reach the bigger goals, right? So is it helpful or not? I don't know. So it can be helpful in terms of these are like mid targets that you need to reach to really find out goals. So it's not really helpful because they don't really tell you how to do it, right? For instance, target 1.1 by 2030, eradicate extreme poverty, meaning the people who earn less than $1.25 a day, right? So just like this is your wish, right? So that doesn't really tell you how to do it. Target 1.4, right? By 2030, ensure that all men and women, in particular the poor and the vulnerable, have equal rights to economic resources. And so this is the kind of thing that they should, and they should if the world was perfect and so on. So these are kind of targets that they have. So I don't know if they are all of them are helpful or not. Next slide, some other targets. Next slide, please. So first, the last target, 1.B, create sound policy frameworks at the national, regional, and international levels based on pro-poor and gender-sensitive development strategies, support accelerated investment in poverty eradication actions. Right. So this is kind of the this is good because it tells you, what we need. But the limitation is that there's no necessarily a roadmap, right? And is the issue with the United Nations. You want to work with a consensus, so you want all countries to agree on these goals. So the cost that you have to pay is that you cannot dictate countries how to achieve these goals. So you can help people, you can give some education, but you cannot have say that this is how you do it. Right. Next slide, please. So how to alleviate poverty? So it's not going to be a lecture on poverty per se, but just a few themes that we have seen, like in when we went through the causes of poverty. One is measurement. Like we're going to see this a lot through these lectures on AI. Right? So AI is related to big data. Is related. We need things to feed our AI models, right? And we need to be able to measure. It's very difficult to reduce something if you don't measure it, right? For example, my goal is, my goal is to lose like 10 pounds, right? So I have to be able to measure my weight. If I don't measure it, it just be like wishful thinking, right? So you have to be able to measure it. We talk about employment, economic growth. These are necessary. Food, health, and education is a theme, like other goals, but they are related, right? If you don't have, the country doesn't produce enough food or cannot provide enough food for its people, it's very difficult to escape poverty, right? You need good institutions, laws, and governance, right? You need investments, loans, and this is controversial sometimes, but it's also sometimes foreign assistance. The last bit is what they call randomized controlled trials. So this is something that starts to be used a lot in development economics, where you do experiments, or you try to be a scientist instead of having big plans. You try like small experiments in villages, right? You do say, okay, does it help to give money to mothers, right, to women? Give more money to mothers than to fathers, because maybe mothers invest more in their children or not. So you select, you have 100 villages, in half of the villages you help the mothers, in half the villages you don't help them, or you help the fathers, and you look at the outcome, right, on children health and so on. And so a bit like medical doctors would do. It's a way to do it. Next slide, please. So how can AI help alleviate poverty? So here I had the framework I introduced in one of my previous books called an AI Strategy Handbook. Is about the framework that the PCOC framework, right? So PCOC, P-C-O-C. So AI, AI can help for 4 things: for prediction, coordination, optimization, and control, right? And so let me go over these like four ideas one by one. Next slide, please. Prediction, right? So prediction in terms of is related to measurements, right? So you can predict the future, but you can also predict the present, right? Sometimes the present is not observed, but you want to infer it, and you'll see that a lot of AI and machine learning work is around prediction. So on poverty in particular, AI can help to measure poverty today, right? So using satellite imaging, traffic data, internet data, cell phone data, survey data, all this kind of data, and we can feed them into AI models and give you some assessment on poverty. Why is it important? Because poverty is not measured in real time, right? You don't really know if people are poor in real time. So usually we do like national surveys, right? But surveys are done, intermittently, only like every 5 years, some countries every 10 years, or sometimes And you have to do it with people, right? You have to send people into your home. These are like, think about the US census, right? We don't do it every year because it's very costly. Also, you have a census let's say every 10 years. You have to send. You need a lot of resources, send people to homes and questionnaires. Remind people to fill the questionnaires, treat the data, and so on. So, for instance, during COVID, you have nobody. Right? You cannot send people to conduct the surveys, and the latest surveys that you might have might be like 5 years old or even like older than that, right? So AI can help for this what we call nowcasting, right? So forecasting, but for the present, estimating poverty in real time. So this is really the first step, okay? And then there's other you can also predict poverty on the data on crops, on weather and so on. So long periods of drought, we predict poor harvest in the future, and probably food crisis and poverty in the future. Okay. So next slide. So PCOC, right? So coordination, optimization, control. The other areas are less covered by AI today, right? But I think they're going to be explored more in the future. To address poverty, we saw it as multidimensional, right? So we need to also to be able to predict health, education, nutrition, economic activity, right? We remember unemployment, economic growth. So these things also need to be tackled by AI and machine learning models, right? We need to be able to predict them and coordinate the efforts, right, among the specialists or community workers in these different domains, right? Another role for coordination is to complement markets, right? So, for instance, to give information on people and inventories, right? You need to know, there's a lot of issues of supply chain during COVID. So you need to be able to forecast demand, right? You need to forecast, how many people are getting sick. You need to forecast how many vaccines you need, but not only at the national level, but also at the granular level in each villages, district, regions, and so on. You need to have a precise estimate, and as people get sick, you should be able to coordinate this effort. So AI can help for that. You go next slide, please. So optimization is so coordination is really like what are the ingredients? Who are the people? Who are the teams? Or what are the different needs? We need to address that. Optimization is really to refine it and to see what is the optimal amount of intervention you need to allocate to individuals, groups of population. Right? So we know that we need during COVID you need you might need vaccine, or you need doctors or nurses or testing and so on. Optimization will tell you the amount that you need. For food, during the food crisis, also how much food you need to deliver. How it has to be rationed, it has to be rationed, and it has to be calibrated to the most vulnerable population. Okay. Next slide, please. Control. So this is something more in the future, where you give AI decision control, right? That the AI can decide how to deploy the assistance, or how to deploy the aid. So this is like rarely done today, but you can imagine that that AI could work as a dispatcher or to coordinate community workers, for instance, or help them on the scheduling visiting schedules, right? So what is the optimal way to visit the set of villages, and also AI could also help to monitor, to see like was the work done properly, and you can monitor the health, right? If community workers said they did all this vaccination, but you find that in these villages, the health has not improved, then you say, well, maybe there's something wrong. So maybe we need to see what happened, right? Next slide, please. So let me go over some case studies. So these are like machine learning and AI applications to poverty reduction. So here the work has been more on measurement, right? It's really the first step, right? The other steps are less explored, and they're probably being done right now. But first, we have to know where are the poor, right? Where do they live, right? So here I'm going to discuss like three studies. One relying on satellite imaging, satellite data, one on cell phone data, and the third one on they try to combine satellite, cell phone, social media data, and to build these poverty maps. Okay. So next slide. So the satellite imaging can complement traditional measures of poverty made from infrequent and expensive national surveys, such as the what they call DHS, demographic and health surveys on household consumptions and wealth levels. So the DHS surveys are conducted typically like every 5 years, I think, and they are sponsored by the United States International Development Agency, USAID, right? So it's done on most low and medium income countries, but not done in real time. So only every five years. And it's also a survey. So it means it doesn't cover the whole country, right? You would select a few thousand, maybe 10,000 households, and you go and visit them, and this is very manual, right? So government employees or contractors have to be sent across the country, right, to reach out to some of the representative households to collect the data, right? So data from we are 2022, right? You have poverty data from 2017. So maybe it's too stale, it's too old. A lot of things have happened. COVID has happened, and so you might need more updated information. So some households might have improved their situation, but some have like things might have been worse because, for instance, of COVID. Or we saw previously maybe hundreds of millions of people become poor again. So some researchers have used satellite imagery and machine learning techniques to understand economic well-being in Africa. Why Africa? Why? Because we saw that poverty is mostly concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So here they have been using satellite imaging data. So here, I believe they're from Landsat data. So here it's overcolored. This gives you a typical like satellite imaging for different like spectral bands on the different colors, blue, green, and red, and it's kind of colors that you see. Next slide, please. So what did they use? So they use like survey data from this DHS survey for some clusters in 23 African countries, right? Between 2009 and 2016 to train different computer vision models, right? So these computer vision models that are called some of the most prevalent are called convolutional neural networks or CNNs, but they're typically used to recognize faces or digits, characters, and so on. So they're used a lot, right? And they use on the images come from satellites, some satellites that collect nighttime lights data on what they call multispectral daytime images, right? So nighttime lights means these are the lights that you can see at night, right? So at night, so if you are like, for instance, I live in New York City. So New York City emits a lot of light at night, right? From the sky, from space, we can see Manhattan, right? And the other boroughs very clearly at night, right? Because there's a lot of light. Big cities emit a lot of lights. And the hypothesis is that the amount of emitted lights at night is correlated to wealth and income, right? So if you are in poor rural areas, you probably have fewer lights at night, right? So you use that. Then multispectral daytime imageries so these are measuring of reflection, so light reflection of objects, of land, of plants, of crops on land, of water, and all these different objects reflect light differently depending on the spectrum. Right, so you have the visible light, right? You have these different colors, but you have also the infrared lights, and there's a different range spectrum, and depending on the content, the content of your the object, a rock or a plant will reflect light differently. That's why there are different colors to us and visible light. And the amount of water, for instance, will reflect light differently. Like because of a lake or a land will reflect light differently. So the models are designed to predict the level of wealth, right, and the changes of wealth, right. So the data are collected from the multispectral data. So like the visible to infrared thermal are collected by the Landsat data. So they were they're managed by NASA and the US Geological Survey. And they are designed to study like global land masses. Next slide, please. So the idea, so how it works. So you have all these images, right? And you have all this survey data, right? So what you want to do, you want to correlate these images, data and the images, with the level of poverty, of wealth collected from the survey data. That's how you train the model, right? So the model is going to find pattern, right? They're going to find pattern. So they'll find probably that areas with low level of nighttime light emission is correlated with goes hand in hand with a low level of wealth, right? Because probably they cover rural areas, right? So they find this kind of pattern. So you can build your model like this, and then you can test it, right? The way they test it, right? They look at the sample of data, so geographical areas with the prediction from the satellite images and the level of wealth, and the wealth from the surveys, and they see how close they are, right? So they typically do it by what we call cross validation. So they isolate one subset of the data set. They train the model, let's say these are like 10 folds on 90% of the data, and they test the data on 10% of the remaining data, and they look at the out of sample that correlation, and they find the 70% correlation, which is like pretty good. For changes, it's harder. Changes is always harder than to predict levels. And here, by using other surveys data, like living standards measurement surveys, I think they're like government surveys, they find that they can predict, like 35% of variation in changes. Okay, they apply the models to what they call two tasks. One is to understand the relationship between wealth and extreme temperature, right? So using the model, they have a prediction of wealth for all geographical areas in the country, and in over all these African countries. And you want to see, is there a correlation between temperature and wealth, right? Does it make sense? So they find that usually wealth will increase with temperature, but then will decrease when the maximum temperature is very high, right? Which is also quite intuitive, right? It's very hot, productivity is low, or they have more drought, or whether it's is worse, so it will affect poverty. A second task that on which they test the model is to do hypothetical cash transfer. Right? So they try to target they want to give cash to the poorest household, right? And predicted by the model, and they try to see they manage to reach these poor households, right? Is that are the predicted poor households are really poor, right? Is the model usable like that? And they find that that it is. Next page, please. So here, this is an example. I think this is like a South Africa, on a sub-region in South Africa. I'm not sure if it's Cape Town, but it might be it. So what do you see? Yeah, you see? So A is the whole country. H is the small region, right? Identified by the rectangle. And you see the inputs, right, that they use, right? You have the NL, the nighttime light imagery, right? So these are the kind, you see these the clusters of lights that you see at night. MS imagery, like the multispectral imagery, and then you have the survey data for wealth. But you see, it doesn't cover the whole country, right? It covers only some areas, and then it's how you build the model. Right? You try to relate the survey wealth to these imagery the data, right? And then C, E, and G, right? The pictures are depending if you use only data from the nighttime light, multispectral, or use the combination of both. Right? You can get combinations. You see, it's more spread out. Right? Usually, it's better to use more inputs than fewer. Right? They have more diversification. Okay, so this is like satellite imaging. Next slide, please. So here, these are mobile data. So this is another study. Is to use cell phones. So here the study is done. It's not done on the whole African continent. It's done for the country of Togo, and during the COVID pandemic. So I think I mentioned that to you earlier. So the idea was to give money to people who needed the money, right? So the program called like Novici. There's a website, you can Google it. So it targets individuals with cell phones and give them a cash, like mobile cash. There are things that you can use to buy items and so, right? But the individuals that they target are people who can sign up to the program. They're registered to vote, so they help people in some specific regions, and they declare that they work in an informal occupation. It means that you don't work for a company, but you're like a street vendor and so on. And in developing countries, in fact, most of the workforce, surprisingly, is work in the informal economy. Right? They don't have they work for themselves. If you come from you visit these countries, a lot of like street vendors, people who send you all kind of things. Or farmers sell their own production, and so these are like so that they are in informal occupation. So people they target are people who say, who are able to fill up a form and say, I work in informal occupation. So you can see that this shows clearly some limitation, right? Because maybe people who are the most destitute cannot fill up a form. They're not literate, or they might not have a mobile phone, right? And they might not be able to register online, right? But this is what they. There was no other way to do it. Probably is what the Togo government thought. So that's why we use mobile data. But if you do any project with mobile data, you have to think in terms of what percentage of the population doesn't have mobile data. I think even in the US, some people don't have cell phones. Next slide, please. So this is the Novici program was what was proposed by the government in Togo. So these researchers were proposing to use AI, machine learning, to improve, right, the targeting of this cash transfer, right? So here the idea is the same as before. So they use like survey data to calibrate their model. So they use like 2 field surveys by National Institute of Statistics, right, the INSEAD. That there were like 2 surveys, one in person, done in 2018 and 2019, and the second one done in the was a phone survey because of COVID, they couldn't send people, targeting rural areas done in 2020, right? To collect economic wealth, consumption, demographic, and residence data. So when they talk to these people, so either they have the phone numbers already, right, or they ask them for the phone numbers when they do the in-person survey. And these researchers had access to cell phone data from the two providers, the two national providers in the government of Togo, right? So they didn't have the name of these people, right? This provides privacy, but they had the numbers. So they could map the survey answers, right, to the cell phone numbers and to the metadata. I don't know if they themselves could see the phone numbers, but at least the mapping could be done, right, on the phone metadata. But the metadata is in fact it's a lot of data. So they use, I think, around 700 mobile phone features, right, related to phone calls and SMS messages. So it's a lot, right? So it's not only if you have a phone or you don't have a phone, right? So the model is used. So when you correlate, cell phone data, there's one typical hypothesis that people who have iOS phone, especially in these countries, have higher income than people who have Android phones, right? Because Apple phones are more expensive, but they're even more expensive in countries like Togo, right, in Africa. So you could use that, you have an iOS, because cell phone providers know, right, if you have an iOS phone, Android phone, so you can use that as a feature, right, for your model to proxy for wealth. But you have also duration of a call, right? You use your phone a lot, it's like more likely that your income is higher, right? You can afford to use your phone longer. So let's go to the next slide. I think we can give more details in this next slide. The next slide, please. Yes, so that just to conclude on the number of features, other examples are a number of cell phone towers of Wi-Fi connection. Right? You have if you have they count numbers of Wi-Fi hotspot around your phone. They're able to have that. So hypothesis is that you have more like more Wi-Fi hotspots or Wi-Fi stations around you. You're probably maybe in a richer area. Maybe you're in a city. Versus if you're in a village when there's no Wi-Fi, versus a city when you have like 20 Wi-Fi hotspot around you. In the second case, you're probably better off. So use this kind of data. So they're able to connect this this cell phone data to the wealth level collected from the survey data and build a model. Right? And then here again they try to simulate a cash transfer program to see if you can reach out the poor people accurately using the cell phone data, and they find that they can do it compared to the previous approach or the university program where they just self-declare that they work in the informal sector, or approaches where we say, okay, we're going to help people who live in this particular region, right? So you see, it's very coarse. So you say, oh, I'm going to help people who live in these 10 villages, and we don't tell the difference between the chief of the village, the local doctor, and the poor the poor widow, right? It might be very, very, very inefficient. Okay. So next slide, please. So we're going to ask the end. So here, this is a very ambitious project. So this is called a poverty map. There's a live website. I think the website is called like Beta Poverty Map, or something. You can Google it. So it's an ambitious project to build macro estimates of absolute and relative wealth, macro areas, right? So these areas are like typically like 2.4 kilometers by 2.4 kilometers of areas, right? And they cover like 135 low and medium income countries. And so it's more than just like African countries, right? And they use geographical, demographic, alternative digital data, so satellite, mobile, Facebook. So everything that we've seen before, but combined and scale up to many more countries, right? And they use also something new that they use Facebook data. I think some of the co-authors were working at for Meta at the time. So they have cited the paper here. And this is, you see on the slide, you go to the website, you can see this real-time, or real-time, at least updated maps, the 3D maps of wealth by little squares. So you have these little squares. So the height is the level of wealth, right? I think that either wealth or income, like of dollars. Let's say it could be dollars per day or per year. And the different colors are the relative wealth, right? If it's more like brownish, it's like high. If it's lighter, it means like it's low, right? And this, you can explore this map by yourself. Let's go to the next slide. So here also, they have the similar approach. So we use as a ground truth, right, to calibrate the model real household survey data from DHS, right? And then the features that they use, right, to in the model use like road density. There are a lot of roads, in that area. Is it the urban, the elevation, the slope? Is there like the precipitation, the weather, what's the weather pattern in that area, population, number of cell towers, Wi-Fi access points, right? Number of mobile devices in that area, Android devices, iOS devices, night lights, right? The night light we saw before, radiance, satellite imagery, and so satellite imagery is a lot of data. So usually they use a principal component analysis to reduce the number of data points from the satellite images. The model is what we call a gradient boosting tree model. You can look for it. It's not a step. It's a very effective model. It's not like it's not a fancy, in fact, neural network models here in this case, but it's quite effective. And what they find is that the most important features are in fact connectivity data, right? The cell phone data, the Wi-Fi data, and so on are very like a good proxy for wealth, but also like satellite data, road density, and population. Right? So that if you're like in a highly dense area, it's more likely that you are in a wealthy area. Right? Next slide, please. So they validate the model by doing using the cross validation. Once, meaning you train your data, the model on a subset of the data, and test and validate your data on another subset that was untouched, right? And they also use independent surveys that they didn't use in their model, right? And they find a high correlation, like independent surveys of wealth, right? Connected. So DHS are connected by USAID, right? But these like the governments in Togo, Nigeria conduct their own also surveys, government surveys, and they find also high correlation with what they find and these government surveys. Right? So they also simulate some anti-poverty program, and they find to see if they can do they reach the right population, and they try to look at the welfare distribution. Do the poor people like being helped out by these programs? Right? The idea: do you reach out? Do these models tell you accurately where the poor people are? Right? But the main advantage that these things, satellite images, typically in 5-10 days they cover the whole planet, right? So so this data can be updated every 10 days, or sometimes even more often, versus survey data, which are like every 5 years, every 10 years. Right? So it's a huge difference, right? So even though there can be some sometimes statistically the improvement is not that great versus, for instance, fresh survey data and satellite data, sometimes the difference is not that great, right? But the idea is that satellite data are much more frequent, right? If you can have like the equivalent to DHS data every 5 days, every week, versus every 5 years, every 10 years, this is a big plus. Right? It makes a big difference. So next slide, please. So to conclude, So this is a very quick overview and less now, but we've seen that it has many causes, right? It's also related to other goals, so many of other sustainable development goals, food, healthcare, poverty, education, employment, economic growth, infrastructure. AI can help with that PICOP framework: prediction, coordination, optimization, and control, even though, at least for poverty, people are more focused on prediction, on measurement. Right? So try to predict poverty in some areas that were not covered by government or government surveys. I believe that we'll see more AI application, right? I will see AI experts, data scientists, domain experts, NGOs, international institutions, World Bank, development banks, and governments working together, right, to work on this effort on poverty. Right. One challenge is that the expertise in AI and machine learning is still limited, right? And AI experts, so they have to learn about the new domains, right? So they are in poverty. They have to learn from domain experts, from economies, from NGOs, and so on, about the ABCs of poverty, right? You have to know a bit of the context of before applying these models. At the same time, the domain experts might not be familiar with all the techniques, right? They might not be familiar with satellite imaging. They might not be familiar with the kind of models that AI machine learning experts can run. So, but I believe that, and that's one reason why I wrote this book. That is that as more people try to learn from each other, from the other domains, and the AI people learning from the from these from social scientists and so on, and the domain experts were learning from the machine learning experts and AI experts. There'll be more collaboration and more fruitful work done together. Next slide, please. The last one, I think. So these are just references. So you see references on this paper. I mean, there are a lot of papers now on satellite imaging. What is interesting is that it's most of this data, at least for research purposes, are free of charge, so you can use them. The challenge that these files are huge, right? Because satellite image data are huge, but you see that some researchers are trying to make life easier so that you can, for instance, call some of these images through a pattern notebook and apply these models more easily. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I can take a few questions if you have any. You can raise your hand and I can unmute you if you want. If you don't have any questions, you can always reach out to me to Meetup. Right? There's also the messaging features in Meetup. And next week we talk about hunger. So it's really hunger. It's really about it's a lot about also agriculture, right? How to enhance crop yields, monitoring weather, and so on. And there's also a big component that relies on satellite imaging, right? So you can also monitor crops, harvest, weather pattern through satellite, and that can be processed through AI. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.